True story. The Alpha King abandoned his new bride in the snow on their wedding night. By morning, she was gone without a trace. There is something about a wedding that makes people feel like everything is going to be okay. The candles are lit, the hall is full, the music is soft and slow, everyone is dressed in their finest. People are smiling at each other the way you only smile at weddings, like maybe love really does win in the end. But on this particular night, in the great stone hall of a northern kingdom, the wedding was not what anyone expected. And by the time the sun came up the next morning, the bride was gone. No one saw her leave, no one heard a door open. There were no footprints past the edge of the forest. There was nothing. It was as if the snow itself had swallowed her whole. This is her story, and his, and the truth that was buried for a very long time. Her name was Seraphine. She had grown up in a small house at the far edge of the Aldrich lands, which is a fancy way of saying she grew up in a place that people forgot about on purpose. Her family had once been important. Generations ago, the Aldrich name meant something. People moved out of the way when an Aldrich walked through a room. But that was a long time ago. By the time Seraphine was old enough to understand the world around her, the Aldrich name was more like a scar than a title. People said it quietly, or not at all. Whatever power her family had once held had been taken away, or stolen, depending on who you asked. But no one really asked anymore. That was the thing about losing your standing in the world. Nobody cares about your fall from grace once the fall is over. Seraphine's grandmother, the old woman everyone called Elder Mira, had raised her mostly alone. Her parents had died when she was young, and Mira had stepped in the way grandmothers do, quietly, without drama, with warm food on the table and cold truth when it was needed. Mira was not a soft woman. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through the walls you built around yourself. But she was kind, and she loved Seraphine in that deep, steady way that asks for nothing in return. Growing up, Seraphine had learned two things about herself. The first was that she was not particularly loud. She did not argue. She did not demand attention. When something upset her, she would go quiet instead of erupting. People sometimes mistook that quietness for weakness, and she let them. It was easier that way. The second thing was harder to explain. Every now and then, usually in winter, usually when she was alone, she would feel something move inside her. Not pain, not fear, something older than either of those things. It felt like a door somewhere in her chest, trying to open. She had never told anyone about it. She did not have the words, and honestly, she was not sure she wanted the words. She just let it be. She kept quiet. She went on with her life. And then one afternoon, when she was 22 years old, a letter arrived at the house. It had a royal seal, heavy paper, the kind of letter that does not arrive at poor people's doors unless something has gone very wrong or very strange. She opened it at the kitchen table while Mira sat across from her, watching. It was an order, a formal mating agreement signed by the crown. She had been chosen as the bonded mate of King Calum Voss, Alpha of the Northern Pack Alliance. The ceremony would take place in 3 weeks. Seraphine read the letter twice. Then she put it down on the table and looked at her grandmother. Mira was already watching her. The old woman's face did not look surprised. It looked like someone who had been waiting for a specific bus and had finally seen it come around the corner. "Did you know about this?" Seraphine asked. Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I knew something like this would come. I didn't know exactly when." "That's not the same as answering my question." Mira looked at her hands. "No," she said finally. "I suppose it's not." Seraphine did not press her. She had learned long ago that Mira gave information on her own schedule. Pushing only made the schedule longer. So she folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and went to pack a small bag. What else was there to do? You did not say no to the Alpha King. Calum Voss was 28 years old, and there was not a single person in the Northern Pack Alliance who was not at least a little afraid of him. That is not an exaggeration. That is just how things were. He had become king at 19, which is far too young for most people, but Calum had not seemed young in a long time. He had been born into a family where softness was treated like a sickness. His father had ruled the packs through fear and calculation. His mother had left when he was 7. He had one older brother who had died in a territorial dispute before Calum was even old enough to understand what territorial disputes really meant. By the time he took the crown, he had already learned the most important lesson his family had to teach him. Do not let anything get close enough to be used against you. He ran the alliance well. If you judge a king by whether the borders hold and the food stores stay full, roads were kept, disputes between packs were settled, usually without too much bloodshed. He was fair in the way that a mountain is fair. It does not treat anyone differently. It simply stands there and lets you deal with it. But he was cold. People who had met him in person described the same thing every time. You would walk into a room with him, and within 30 seconds you would understand that he already knew what he thought of you, and it was probably not very warm. He looked at people the way you look at a problem you are trying to solve, efficiently, without sentiment. There was one exception, and her name was Isolde. Isolde came from a powerful family in the southern part of the Alliance. She was clever, and she was beautiful, and she understood people in a way that very few people do. She understood what they wanted, and she understood how to make them feel like she was the only one who could give it to them. She had been close to Calum for years. Most people assumed they would eventually formalize things. Most people were wrong. Calum had chosen Seraphine instead, or rather, the formal agreement had been arranged, and Calum had not refused it. Those two things might sound the same, but they are not. He had been presented with documents. He had been told about the Aldrich bloodline, about the old alliances, about the political stability that a bond with the Aldrich name could provide. He had read the documents. He had nodded. He had signed where he was told to sign. He had not asked anyone to bring him a picture of her. He had not sent a letter. He had not tried to find out who she was as a person. Isolde had delivered the documents herself. She had stood in his study and smiled while he read them, which he did not find strange at the time. He would find it very strange later. The morning of the ceremony, it was snowing. Not the gentle, pretty kind of snow that makes everything look like a painting. The heavy, serious kind. The kind that piles up fast and turns the world gray at the edges. The kind of snow that means winter is not playing around. Seraphine had arrived at Voss Keep 3 days before the ceremony, as instructed. She had been given a room. Attendants had come to measure her and dress her and arrange her hair. She had been polite to all of them. They had been polite back, in that formal, careful way people are polite to someone they are not sure how to categorize. She had not seen the king in those 3 days. Not once. No meeting, no introduction, no note slipped under the door, nothing. The attendants told her this was normal, that the king was busy, that the ceremony would be where they were formally introduced. Seraphine listened and said nothing, but she noticed. On the morning of the wedding, one of the younger attendants, a girl who looked barely 17, with dark braids and nervous hands, helped Seraphine into her gown. It was a white dress, heavier than it looked, with long sleeves that did not quite reach her wrists. It was beautiful, in the way that very formal things are beautiful. It had not been made with warmth in mind. The girl with the dark braids kept glancing at Seraphine's face while she worked on the buttons at the back. Finally she said, very quietly, "You're not scared?" Seraphine looked at her in the mirror. "A little," she said. "Are you?" The girl blinked. Then she let out a small, surprised laugh. "A little," she admitted. That was the best conversation Seraphine had in the 3 days she spent at Voss Keep, before everything went wrong. The ceremony itself was held in the Great Hall. It was full. Every alpha from every pack in the Alliance, elders, nobles, advisors, guards in their formal uniforms. Hundreds of people, all in their best clothes, all standing and watching as Seraphine walked in. She walked alone. There was no one to walk with her. Mira had not been permitted to come. Seraphine had thought she would feel more nervous in that moment. Instead, she felt very calm, which surprised her. The hall was warm and smelled of pine smoke and candle wax. The faces watching her were a blur. She kept her eyes on the front of the room. King Calum was already standing at the dais. He was taller than she had imagined. He wore formal black, no decoration except the crown, which was simple, dark metal, no jewels. His hair was dark. His expression was the kind of expression that has no expression in it at all, if you know what that means. He was watching her walk toward him the way you watch weather move across a field, noting it, waiting for it to arrive. She came to stand beside him. He did not look at her face. He looked at the elder conducting the ceremony. The words were said, the ritual was performed, the bond mark, a real physical thing in their world, a mark that appears on the skin when two people are formally joined, appeared. It settled on her collarbone, just below her neck, a soft ache, like a bruise forming from the inside out. She saw him press 2 fingers against his own wrist briefly, where his mark would have appeared. The hall applauded. It was over. And then Calum turned to the crowd. The applause was still fading when he spoke. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. The hall went quiet on its own, the way rooms go quiet for certain kinds of people. "I have to tell this assembly something," he said, "before this night goes any further." Seraphine stood 1 step to his left, still facing the crowd. She did not understand at first what was happening. She thought perhaps he was going to make some formal statement. Kings made formal statements. That was part of the job. "The documents that led to this arrangement," Calum said, "have come under serious question. There are claims about the Aldrich bloodline that my council has been examining. Claims about loyalty, about a plot against the crown." The silence in the hall changed quality. It became the kind of silence where everyone is holding their breath. Seraphine turned to look at him. He did not look back at her. "I will not build a bond on a foundation that cannot be trusted," he said. "For the integrity of this alliance, I am formally rejecting this bond, effective immediately." And then he turned. He reached past her, not toward her, past her, and he took a cloak that had been waiting on the arm of a chair, and he placed it over the shoulders of Isolde, who was standing at the side of the dais. Isolde, who had delivered the documents. Isolde, who had been smiling. The room erupted. Seraphine stood where she was. She did not move. She felt like the floor had tilted slightly, and she was waiting to see which direction things would slide. 2 guards appeared at her elbows. They did not touch her roughly. They just appeared, and then they were moving, and she was moving with them, because what else do you do when 2 guards appear at your elbows? She was walked to the back of the hall, through a side corridor, past a tapestry she noticed for no reason at all. It was of a hunting scene, reds and browns, very old. Through a heavy door, and then she was outside. The cold hit her immediately. It was not a gentle cold. It was the serious northern kind, the kind with wind behind it. The snow was coming down steadily. She was in her wedding gown. Her feet were in thin indoor shoes that were already wet. She heard the door close behind her. She stood there for a moment, looking at the snow. Her bond mark ached. It was a strange ache, not just physical. It felt like something had been connected and then instantly pulled on from the other end, like holding a rope and feeling someone yank it. She looked down at it, where it sat just below her collarbone, barely visible at the neckline of the dress. She touched it lightly with 1 finger. Then she looked up at the forest. The ashwood. Everyone had told her not to go near the ashwood. It was the kind of forest that showed up in stories, old stories. The kind children were told to make sure they stayed on paths. No one went into the ashwood in winter. The cold in there was different, people said. Deeper. Seraphine looked at the forest. Then she looked back at the doors behind her, sealed and quiet. She started walking toward the trees. She did not know, as she walked, that this was the last time anyone from the keep would see her footprints, that by morning a search party would find the trail ending at an old stone marker at the edge of the tree line, with no explanation and no continuation, that the prints would simply stop, as if she had been lifted from the ground. She did not know any of that yet. She just walked. The strange thing, and this would take her some time to realize was strange, was that she was not as cold as she should have been. She was cold. Of course she was cold. She was in a wedding gown in a blizzard, with thin shoes that had been soaked through within the first 2 minutes. Any normal person in that situation would have been in serious trouble very quickly, but as she moved deeper into the trees, the cold settled into something she could work with. Not comfortable, not warm, but manageable, like it had an edge to it that she could hold without cutting herself. She did not have a plan. She did not know where she was going. She was moving on instinct, and her instinct was pulling her in one direction, further into the dark between the trees, away from the keep and everything in it. After a while, she had no way to know how long, maybe an hour, maybe more. Her legs gave out. Not from cold exactly, from the sheer weight of the evening catching up with her. She went down on her knees in the snow beside a frozen spring and stayed there. She did not cry. She wanted to. There was something large and aching in her chest that wanted to come out as crying, but it did not come. It just sat there. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about Mira's face when she had seen the letter, that look of someone who had been expecting this specific bus. She thought about the way Calum had handed the cloak to Isolde without looking at her. She thought about how she had walked down that aisle completely alone, and then she heard something move. She looked up. Across the frozen spring, sitting completely still in the snow, was a wolf. Not a werewolf. This was not that kind of world. Not exactly. Just a wolf. But it was the largest wolf she had ever seen, and its fur was the color of fresh snow. It was watching her with pale eyes that caught what little light came through the trees. She did not move. It did not move. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Then the wolf dropped something from its mouth into the snow in front of it and stepped back. Seraphine stared at the object. Then, slowly, she got up and walked around the edge of the spring to where the wolf had been. The wolf moved away to give her room, but it did not leave. It was a small locket, old silver, worn smooth. The clasp had the Aldrich crest on it. She recognized it because Mira had a ring with the same symbol. She picked it up. Inside the locket was a tiny square of paper, folded several times to fit. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was her grandmother's. It said, "When the king breaks you, the forest will remake you. You are not what they told you. You never were. Do not be afraid of what you find." Seraphine read it 3 times. Then she looked at the wolf. The wolf tilted its head slightly, as if to say, "Yes, that's right. Keep going." She put the locket around her neck, over the bond mark, and she stood up straighter than she had all night. Commander Wren had served King Calum for 6 years. In that time, he had done a lot of things he was not particularly proud of, because that is sometimes what serving powerful people asks of you. He had delivered bad news. He had enforced decisions he did not personally agree with. He had learned to keep his face very neutral. But the morning after the wedding ceremony, standing at the edge of the ashwood looking at footprints that simply stopped, he found it very difficult to keep his face neutral. The trail was clear. Seraphine had walked from the side door of the keep to the edge of the trees. You could see every step. The gown had dragged in the snow. She had walked into the tree line, and then, at a large flat stone with old marks carved into it, the prince stopped. He had his men circle the stone 4 times. He had them check for hidden paths, for ice that might have covered tracks, for anything. There was nothing. She was simply gone. He went back to report to the king. Calum was in his study, standing by the window. He looked like a man who had not slept, which was unusual. In 6 years, Wren had never seen the king look tired. Tired was not part of his repertoire. Wren explained what the search party had found, or rather, had not found. Calum said nothing for a moment. Then he pressed 2 fingers against his wrist, right where the bond mark would be. He pressed hard, like he was testing something. "She's not dead," he said. Wren blinked. "Your Majesty, if she were dead, the mark would be gone," Calum said. He looked at his wrist. "It's still there. It's still—" He paused. "Active." Wren did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Isolde appeared in the doorway. She had already heard, clearly. She looked very composed, which Wren noticed. People who receive news that a woman has vanished in a blizzard on a winter night usually do not look composed. "You should make a formal announcement," she said. "Tell the Alliance she's gone. Let the Pax know the situation has been resolved." "Resolved," Calum repeated. "The matter of the bond, the rejection." Isolde stepped into the room. "If she's lost in the ashwood, that is a tragedy, but it simplifies things considerably." There was a pause. "Simplifies things," Calum said again. He had a way of repeating words that made the person who had said them suddenly aware of exactly how they sounded. Isolde smiled. I only mean, I know what you mean, he said. Leave me. She left. Calum stood at the window until Ren was not sure if he was supposed to still be in the room. Then the king looked down at his wrist again. The mark was faint, but it was glowing. Barely, like an ember you're not sure is still going. Find out everything you can about the Aldrich family, Calum said quietly. Not the official documents, the real history. Ren said, Yes, Your Majesty, and he left to do exactly that. She had survived the night. That was the first thing Seraphine understood when she woke up the next morning. She was lying on a bed of dry pine needles under an overhang of rock that had kept most of the snow off her, and she was cold, but she was alive. More than alive, actually, which was the part that did not make sense. The cuts on her feet from the walk through the snow, she had lost the flimsy shoes somewhere in the night, were almost completely healed. Not bandaged, not better, healed. She checked them 3 times to be sure. She sat up and looked at her hands. They were red from the cold but undamaged. Her gown, which should have been completely destroyed by a night in the woods, was torn at the hem but otherwise intact. The wolf was still there. It had settled itself about 10 feet from her during the night and was now watching her with the calm, patient expression of something that has all the time in the world. Are you going to tell me what's happening? She asked it. The wolf blinked slowly. Right, she said. Okay. She held the locket in her hand and reread her grandmother's note. You are not what they told you. You never were. She thought about the cold that felt manageable. The healed feet. The way the forest, which was supposedly dangerous and impassable, had felt like, not home exactly, but familiar, like a word you've forgotten but recognized the shape of. She got up. Her legs were stiff, but they held. She looked around, and then she noticed the stones. They were everywhere, once she started looking. Large, flat stones with carved marks on them, half buried under snow, hidden behind roots and moss. The same kind of stone as the one at the edge of the tree line where her footprints had stopped. They formed a rough trail leading deeper into the forest. She had walked past several of them in the night without realizing what they were. She recognized the marks now, the same crest as the locket, the same symbol as Mira's ring, Aldrich territory markers, her family's markers. Out here in this cursed, impassable forest that nobody went into, her family had been here. She started walking. News travels fast in a world built on alliances, and the news from Voss Keep spread like water finding cracks. The Alpha King had bonded a woman at a formal ceremony, and then rejected her publicly and sent her out into the snow within the same hour. By morning she had vanished without a trace. The reactions were varied. 2 packs from the eastern border pulled their representatives out of the Alliance Council within the week. Their formal message said it was about the integrity of the bond process. Their unofficial message, which Ren heard through people he trusted, was different. There was an old belief in many of the packs, one that was not talked about in formal settings but lived in the older stories, that a rejected bondmate did not just leave. She took something with her, some thread of luck, some protection, and if she died, the one who rejected her paid for it. People were watching to see what would happen to Calum. The council meetings became difficult. Isolde had positioned herself firmly at Calum's right hand, and some advisors had simply accepted this as the new reality, but others hadn't. There were questions asked in corners. Why had the Aldrich girl been chosen in the first place? What exactly were these documents that had raised concerns? Could anyone actually see them? And Ren, meanwhile, had been doing his homework. The real history of the Aldrich family was not hard to find, once you knew where to look. It was in the old record halls, in boxes that had not been opened in decades. The Aldrichs had not been a minor disgraced family. They had been the Frost sovereigns, the bloodline that had originally blessed and legitimized the Northern throne. There was an old compact, centuries ago, that said the Alpha King's rule was only truly sanctioned if it was joined with the Aldrich line. No one talked about the compact anymore. It had been buried, deliberately, sometime around the period when the Aldrich family status had started to fall. Ren brought this information to Calum. Calum sat with it for a long time. Then he looked at the documents Isolde had originally given him, the ones claiming the Aldrich family had plotted against the crown. He looked at the signatures. He looked at the dates. He was very good at reading documents. It was one of his actual skills. He found the problem within 10 minutes of looking properly. The signatures on the accusation documents were from witnesses who, according to the official records Wren had pulled, had been dead for 4 years before the documents were supposedly written. He set the papers down. He pressed his fingers against the bond mark on his wrist, which had been doing something unusual for the past several days. It was not just glowing anymore. It was moving, a very faint directional pull, like a compass needle, pointing consistently in one direction. He had been ignoring it. He stopped ignoring it. On the third day in the forest, following the stone markers and the silver wolf, Seraphine found it. She almost walked past it. It was buried. Centuries of ice and growth and snow had done what they do to things that have been left alone long enough. But the stones around the entrance were the same marked stones. And when she pressed her hand flat against the wall beside the door, the wall did something that walls should not do. It lit up. Beneath the ice and the grime, something in the stone responded to her touch. Faint lines of pale light, tracing shapes, old writing, old symbols. She could not read them, but they felt like they were meant for her. The door opened. Frost Keep was not a ruin in the way you might picture a ruin. It was preserved, sealed somehow against the centuries. The air inside was cold but still. The ceilings were high. There were no furnishings, but there were marks everywhere. On the walls, the floors, the pillars, all of it the same Aldrich script. In the center of the main hall, there was a single stone chair. Not a throne, exactly, something older than thrones. And when Seraphine walked toward it, the marks on the walls all lit up at once. She stood very still for a moment. Then she sat down. It was like a key turning in a lock she had been carrying all her life without knowing it. Everything that had been sitting in her chest, that feeling like a door trying to open, opened, all of it at once. She felt the cold completely and was not hurt by it. She felt the forest, its weight and its stillness, like it was an extension of her. She felt the stones of the keep as if they were part of her body. She sat in that chair for a long time. When she stood up, she was different, not in any way that anyone would be able to point to and name, necessarily. But she knew something she had not known before. She was not the leftover daughter of a disgraced family. She was the heir to something that predated every king who had sat on a northern throne. The wolf came and sat beside the chair. "I'm not leaving," she said to it. The wolf set its chin on her knee. "Good," she said. "Then neither are you." He told no one where he was going. This was not responsible behavior for a king. He knew that. He left a note for Wren, brief, to the point, and he walked out of Voss Keep in the early hours of the morning, before anyone was awake. He wore traveling clothes, not royal ones. He carried no crown. He followed the bond mark. The forest was difficult. It was genuinely difficult, the kind of forest that seems to put obstacles in your path on purpose. The cold here was different from the cold outside, just like people said. It had a weight to it, a presence. He walked for the better part of 2 days, stopping only when he had to, sleeping briefly against a tree trunk with his coat pulled tight. He ate what he had brought. He kept following the pull on his wrist. He had a lot of time to think. He thought about the documents Isolde had given him. He thought about the signatures from dead men. He thought about how he had not verified anything before acting. He had signed what he was given. He had rejected the bond in front of an entire assembly based on paperwork he had never questioned. He thought about a woman walking down an aisle alone, with no one to walk with her. He had not looked at her face in the hall. He had been watching the elder, the crowd, the exits, anything except her. He was very good at not looking at things he didn't want to deal with. He thought about the cloak he had placed on Isolde's shoulders, how that must have looked, how it must have felt. He did not have words for what he was feeling, exactly. He was not a man who had spent much time with his own feelings. But there was something heavy in his chest that had been there since the morning he had pressed his fingers to his wrist and realized she was still alive out there somewhere in that forest. Heavy and sharp at the same time, like a stone with an edge. On the morning of the second day, he came through a gap in the trees and saw the keep. He stopped. He had not known it existed. He was the king of this territory, and he had not known there was a structure like this inside the Ashwood, which told him something about how thoroughly the Aldrich history had been buried. And there, in the courtyard, standing very straight in the morning light, was Seraphine. She was not in the wedding gown anymore. She had found clothes somewhere in the keep, old things, but heavy and warm. Her hair was down. She was holding the locket in one hand, absently, the way people hold things they've come to depend on. The silver wolf was at her side. She saw him before he reached the gate. She went very still. He stopped at the entrance to the courtyard and looked at her. He was not sure what he had expected to find. Probably something that confirmed the story he'd been telling himself, that she was fine, that she had managed, that he could assess the situation and address it as a practical matter. He was good at practical matters. But she was standing there looking at him with an expression he could not read, and the bond mark on his wrist was burning, and something in his chest that had been locked down for a very long time chose this moment to stop cooperating. He walked into the courtyard, and then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his knees bent. He was not a man who kneeled, ever, for anyone. It was not a calculation. It was not a performance. Something just gave way, the way a wall gives way when enough has been stacked against it. He went down on one knee in the snow of her courtyard, and he looked up at her. She did not move. He did not dress it up. He was not a man who dressed things up. He told her about the documents, about Isolde delivering them, about the signatures that had turned out to belong to men who had been dead for years, about how he had signed what he had been given without checking. "I acted on false information," he said. "And I acted quickly, because I thought I was protecting the alliance. That is the honest version of what happened." Seraphine listened. Her face did not change much while he spoke. She had that quality, the quietness he had not known about, because he had never actually spoken to her, of listening completely. Not waiting for her turn to talk, actually listening. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You think protecting the alliance was more important than checking whether you had the truth," she said. "Yes," he said. "At the time, yes. And how did that go for you?" He held her gaze. "Not well." Another silence. "I was going to tell you," she said, "about the keep, about what I found in here, about what my grandmother's letter said." She paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. We don't know each other." "No?" he said. "We don't." "You didn't even look at me," she said. "Not angry. Just a fact, stated clearly. In the hall, during the ceremony. You didn't look at my face once." He had no defense against that because it was true. "No," he said again. "I didn't." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the wolf, which had not moved from its position at her side. She looked at the walls of the keep around them, with their still faintly glowing marks. "This place is mine," she said. "Whatever happened to my family, whatever was taken or buried or erased, this is mine. I found it, and I'm not leaving it. I know," he said. "You can stand up," she said. He stood. They were closer than he had realized, the courtyard not being large. He was still taller. She did not look particularly impressed by that. "You have a lot to fix," she said. "Back at the keep, in the alliance, Isolde and those documents and whatever else she put into motion. Yes, you should go do that." He looked at his wrist. The bond mark was calm now, not glowing, just present. "And after?" She considered the question seriously, which he appreciated. She did not brush it aside, and she did not give him an easy answer to make the moment comfortable. "After," she said finally, "we'll see. That's all I can give you right now." It was more than he deserved. He knew that. "All right," he said. He turned to go. "Calum," she said. He stopped. "If you ever hand something of yours to another woman in front of me again," she said quietly, "you won't need to send guards for me. I will leave on my own. And next time I will not leave a bond mark behind." He looked at her over his shoulder for a long moment. "Understood," he said, and he walked back into the forest. He came back to the keep, looking like someone who had slept against trees for 2 nights, which was exactly what had happened. Wren was waiting for him at the gate, and had the good sense not to say anything about how the king looked. He just fell into step beside him and handed him a travel mug of something hot. The council is restless, Ren said. Good, said Calum. Lady Isolde has been active in your absence. Several of the advisors have been pulled aside for what she calls informal conversations. She's always been thorough, Calum said. He drank from the mug and kept walking. Call a formal council session, tonight. I want every pack representative there who is within a day's ride. Ren did not ask questions. That was one of his best qualities. The session that evening was the most uncomfortable one in recent memory, which is saying something because there had been some truly uncomfortable sessions over the years. Calum laid it all out. The documents, the signatures that belonged to dead men, the history of the Aldrich family that had been deliberately buried, including the old compact that tied the legitimacy of the Northern throne to the Aldrich bloodline. He had Ren present the records he had found. He answered questions. He did not evade. Isolde sat at the council table and said very little for the first hour. Then, when it became clear that the room was turning, she shifted. She admitted to certain presentations of information that she conceded may not have been fully verified. She framed it as an excess of caution, a desire to protect the alliance. Calum let her finish. Then he said, the documents were fabricated, the witnesses did not exist, and the mate who was sent into the snow based on those fabrications is alive, and she has found the ancestral seat of her family inside the Ashwood, which she now holds as sovereign. That last part created quite a stir. Isolde looked at him. What the council does with this information, Calum said, is the council's decision, but I want it on the record that I acted on false intelligence, that the rejection of the bond was therefore made in error, and that the Aldrich line is not disgraced. It never was. The council voted to strip Isolde of her titles and remove her from the alliance seat. It was not a close vote. She left 3 days later. She was not treated harshly. She was simply removed. Calum stood at the window of his study and watched her carriage go, and felt something he could not entirely name. Not satisfaction, something more complicated. Responsibility, maybe. The weight of having done a thing that could not be undone, and having to carry that, even after you have done what you can to correct it. He looked at his wrist. The bond mark. Still there. He thought about what she had said. We'll see. That's all I can give you right now. He thought that was probably fair. She was not idle while all of this was happening. The keep had been sealed for so long that it took time to understand. The marks on the walls were a language, not one anyone currently spoke, but one that lived in the Aldrich bloodline somehow, because the more time she spent in the place, the more the shapes began to mean things to her. Not like learning, more like remembering. She sent a message to her grandmother. Mira arrived 2 weeks later, which was impressive, given her age, and the fact that the Ashwood was not exactly a welcoming route. She came accompanied by a young man from the village who had agreed to carry her bags in exchange for a story, which Mira had delivered in installments along the way. When Mira walked into the courtyard of Frostkeep and saw the walls and the marks, she stopped walking. She put her hand over her mouth. You knew this was here, Seraphine said. I knew it existed, Mira said, her voice not quite steady. I did not know it could still be opened. Why didn't you tell me? The old woman looked at her with that seeing through walls expression. Because if I had told you about it, about what you carry, about where you come from, and they had found out I told you, they would have taken you from me before you were old enough to protect yourself. She paused. I kept you small on purpose, Seraphine, so they would underestimate you. I am sorry for what that cost you. I would do it again. Seraphine looked at her grandmother for a long time. Then she stepped forward and hugged her, which was not something they did very often, because neither of them were particularly demonstrative people, but it felt right. You have a lot to explain, Seraphine said into the old woman's shoulder. I know, said Mira. I've been practicing. Over the following weeks, Mira taught her. The history, the compact, the real reason the Aldrich family had lost its standing. Not because of disgrace, but because someone generations ago had decided that a family whose blessing sanctioned the king's rule was a threat to that rule. And so the history had been quietly rewritten, names removed from records, land taken, status eroded. They made us small, Mira said, so they would not have to be accountable to us. Seraphine thought about that a lot. He wrote her a letter. This was not something Calum Voss did. He did not write personal letters. He dictated official correspondence. He gave orders. He did not sit at a desk at midnight and write something 3 times before deciding on a version. But he did, this time. He told her what had happened with the council. He told her about Isolde's removal. He told her that the compact had been formally re-entered into the Alliance records, which meant that the Aldrich seat, her seat, had legal standing in the formal Alliance structure. It was not a gift. It was recognition of something that had always been true. He did not ask her to come back to Voss Keep. He did not ask her anything, actually. He just told her what he had done, and at the end, he wrote, "I do not know what I am asking for. I am not sure I have the right to ask for anything, but I wanted you to know what has been done, and that it was done because it was right, not because I am trying to negotiate with you." He sent it with Wren, who made the trip to the Ashwood without complaint. She read the letter at the window of the keep, looking out at the snow. The wolf was at her feet. She read it twice. Then she wrote back. Her letter was shorter. She told him about the compact's history as Mira had explained it. She told him that the keep would require a formal acknowledgement from the Alliance that the Aldrich lands, the ones that had been taken, generation by generation, were to be returned. This was not a request. It was a condition. She also wrote, "I don't know what we are. The bond mark is still here. I notice it. I don't know yet what that means, or whether I want it to mean anything. What I know is that I am not the woman who walked down that aisle alone, and I will not be treated as if I am. If that is acceptable to you, then perhaps we can have a conversation, a real one, without ceremony." He received her letter and read it standing at his window. Then he called his council together and spent the next week working through the legal architecture of returning the Aldrich lands. It was complicated. Of course it was complicated. These things are always complicated. Generations of records to untangle, holdings that had changed hands multiple times, compensation that needed to be discussed. It was the kind of work that has no dramatic moment, just long meetings and careful drafting and a lot of back and forth. But he did it. Wren, who had served him for 6 years and thought he had seen most of what Calum Voss was capable of, watched this process and felt something close to surprised. Not at the king working hard, Calum always worked hard, but at the reason, at the fact that there was, underneath all the stone and the cold and the distance, something that could be reached. It had just needed the right pressure point. They met again in the spring, not at Voss Keep, not at Frost Keep either, somewhere in between, at a place that belonged to neither of them and therefore to both of them equally, a small inn at the edge of the Ashwood, where the forest meets the road. They both arrived on the same morning, from different directions. He was not wearing the crown. She was not wearing the locket. She had put it away safely in the keep, but she did not need to carry it anymore. She knew what it had told her. She had learned what she needed to learn. They sat across a table from each other and had, as she had put it, a real conversation, without ceremony. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was not supposed to be. There was too much between them. The public rejection, the wedding night in the snow, the months of distance, the things done and undone. You do not wrap all of that up neatly in one afternoon. But they talked. He talked more than he usually did, which surprised him. She listened in that complete way she had, and she asked questions that got into things without being cruel about it. She had a way of saying difficult things without raising her voice. He found that he did not want her to go quiet when she was done. She found that he was not, when you got past the distance and the formality, what she had expected. She was not sure what she had expected. Something colder, something less willing to be held accountable. But he had a way of sitting with an uncomfortable truth and not flinching from it. She could work with that. The bond mark on her collarbone was faint now, not gone. It had settled into something quieter, like background music. She noticed it when he was near. She did not know yet what she was going to do with that, but she was not afraid of it anymore. When afternoon came and it was time to head their separate ways, her back to the keep, him back to Voss, they stood outside the inn for a moment. "Same time next month?" he said. She considered this. "Somewhere different," she said. "I'll pick." "All right." She turned to go. "Seraphine." She stopped, looked back at him. He did not say anything else for a moment, just looked at her, the way he perhaps should have looked at her in that hall, on the night everything went wrong, as if she were a person. "I'll see you next month," he said. She nodded once. "You will," she said. And she walked back to her forest. People who heard about it later, and everyone heard about it eventually, because this was exactly the kind of story that travels, talked about the abandoned bride who survived the Ashwood and came back with the keys to a kingdom older than the current one. Some people talked about the king who had made a terrible mistake and then worked, slowly and without fanfare, to make it right. Some people talked about the woman who had been left in the snow on her wedding night and had walked into a forest that everyone was afraid of and found out who she actually was. The bond mark on both of their wrists never disappeared. What happened after that, whether it became something, whether two people who started in the worst possible way could build something real on the other side of all that damage, that is a longer story. Maybe it was told. Maybe it is still being told. What is certain is this: she did not walk into that forest as a victim. She walked in as a woman with nowhere left to go, and she came out as someone who knew exactly where she stood. The snow had not broken her. It had shown her what she was made of, and what she was made of, it turned out, was exactly the kind of thing that does not break.